Hello, everybody, and welcome again while we talk to our Fictionary writers. So, today I'm very excited. I'm going to just share a sneak peek to have Veronica Ventura here. So, Veronica is an American gynecologist and a global public health practitioner. She has worked in remote places such as Somali refugee camps, Ebola treatment centers, and villages, and I apologize if I pronounce these incorrectly, Timor Leste, Ladakh, India, and Cambodia. As an author, she attributes her success and character development to the diverse experiences in her medical career. Dr. Ventura is a graduate of the University of California at Davis-Tulane University School of Medicine and the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. She lives in Singapore with her husband, 4 cats, and 2 dogs. And funny enough, one of her dogs is named Ryder, which is character in this book. So if that doesn't tell you that Veronica is brave and very adventurous, I don't know what would. So welcome. Why don't we
Thank
start
you.
with, you want to say something else about yourself? Great. And we'll talk about Ryder Stephens.
Well, that was written about 3 years ago. So, things are dynamic in writing a book. So that blurb has changed a little bit. We're moving to Switzerland. so,
Right.
so we lived in Singapore for 15 years, and we're in this next year, we'll be switching over to Switzerland. And we still have the 2 dogs. 1 cat has aged out. We own 3 cats now, but
Okay.
that's okay. She passed on peacefully. But yeah, things have changed because of the pandemic. I got quite
Yeah.
busy in the middle of that and learned and did some interesting things during that, but which interrupted the writing process, but we're going to get back to that now that things are settled down.
Yeah. Okay. So why don't you tell us about Ryder Stephens and what it's about, what genre it's in?
Well, Ryder Stephens is named after my dog. It is a 13-year-old girl, and the way I started doing this is I was getting a master's in public health, and I was supposed to be doing my homework, and I did not want to do my homework. So I looked over to my dog and I said, Ryder, why are you an orphan? Like, where's your mother? And it was so much more fun to start personifying this 2.5-year-old dog into, I kind of did the dog years, made her into a 13-year-old girl and making up stories about why Ryder's an orphan. And then I just started moving with that. There actually wasn't an incentive to write a book. It was a short story that turned into a novella that I just kept writing.
Okay.
And then it just evolved. And then I realized, oh, this is a book and I'm really enjoying this. And so I'm just going to keep going. The main struggle, I guess, was because I didn't start out with a goal in mind, that I needed to keep it real and keep it believable. Why this 13-year-old girl was an orphan, and not only was she existing, but she was doing well. And how does that happen? And that was through the 20 drafts or so that I wrote. I learned that I had to make things more believable. That was the hardest part.
Right. And so, you're kind of talking lightly about it, but it's quite a serious book about a girl.
Yeah.
And she has some big struggles in this book. It's not everything is great and perfect in her life. I just want to read the first sentence, if that's okay.
Okay, that's fine.
I love the opening line of this book. Okay. So chapter 1. Social service replaced the police. Who replaced the ambulance? Who had replaced my mom? And nobody came to take her place. And that just sets it up. You think, oh, okay, now what? Right? So you can see she's been through this experience. So right away, well, how did she lose her mom? What happened to her mom? Where's her dad? What's going on with this girl? And she's very aware of what's happened in her life. So just that one opening sentence tells you so much. And it's a beautiful example of an entry hook into a book about a girl.
Well, it's interesting because I went back to look at my Storyteller before this interview, and I opened up chapter 1. And that is not chapter 1 in the Storyteller, which in the original Storyteller, I went back drafts. That was chapter 3. Oh no, yeah, that was chapter 3 or 4. So I I brought that forward because the original chapter 1 didn't have the hook to,
Mhm.
it didn't do exactly what you just said it needed to
Right.
do. Like, you read the opening paragraph and you're supposed to be inquisitive but not confused. It's
Yeah.
supposed to draw you in. And I think the original book it didn't do any of that.
Right.
And so I just changed chapters.
Nice.
It's interesting. The very first draft, one that you did not read, the first draft was, it was 172 words, and then it jumped to what is now part 2. And my very first editor had said, "You need more backstory. This is just too you what where like what's going on?" And so I
Right.
took that 172 words and made it about 18,000. I mean, I really expanded the whole first chapter
Right.
was the first little, I mean, I really jumped. And so if you recall, there's a issue where she goes to New York, she meets a homeless man, and she has
Mhm.
all that was not, it was
Mhm.
alluded to in like a sentence in the
Right.
first draft. And
Right.
then I expanded on that when I rewrote it. And
Right.
then once I did that first, rewrote that you came into play to help me edit with the content. And that's when you had said, which you can't see when you write, you need somebody
Yeah.
else to look back and tell you that it was too easy, like things were just happening too systemically. So I started rearranging chapters, and so I didn't have to rewrite it, expand a little bit, but I just needed to rearrange the chapters so
Mhm.
it drew you in,
Mhm.
so
Yeah.
yeah. And it was interesting. My first writer, my first editor was, I found him online, and I didn't realize until 3 years after we were working together that he was 21 years old. He was so mature and
Yeah.
so
Nice.
eloquent the way he wrote. He was a master's. He's getting a master's in history. Actually, it wasn't even in writing, but his perspective is what I needed.
Yep.
As I'm 52 now, but when I was writing it, I was 48, and I just wasn't in the headspace of a 13-year-old girl, and he was much closer, even though he was a man. And so it helped having that
Yeah.
editor being younger. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, she certainly, I mean, Ryder comes off like a 13-year-old girl with a lot of serious life problems that
Mhm.
she has to struggle through. And there's a bit of a, without giving away the story, there's a bit of I'm gonna say romance, but it's not a romance in the typical. There's another woman who comes into her life
Mhm.
that's very important to her and she loves.
Okay, not romance. I would say
It's
a
meant I don't know. I don't
what
know
is the
which word
word?
to use without giving it away, but there's a
There's
special
a bond. There's a
there's a
bond that
bond.
comes, yeah, that she needs. It's a vacancy that needs to be
Yes.
filled, and she
Yes.
finds somebody to fill it.
Yes.
And then there's
There's
a
stuff that happens.
with
Don't give away the story.
okay.
Right. There's
Yep.
stuff that
Okay, I
happens.
said conflict.
Conflict. Okay, good. Conflict. But there's stuff that happens, but it's it's a very there's a great emotional arc for Ryder going through the loss of her mother, meeting another mother figure, that kind of
Mhm.
thing, but with all this underlying conflict and other issues happening, plus her side talent and stuff. So there's a
Mhm.
lot going on in this book. And by the time you finish it, you just love Ryder. Like she's an amazing character. And you know,
Thank you. I love Ryder too.
you just want her to be well, right? So tell me how
Mhm.
it felt when you first saw it in print.
Oh, when I first saw it in print, well, it's always it's always fun to hold your own book
It
and to
is, isn't
smell
it?
it, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing better than just flipping through a book.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, you just smell
Fine, I
that
did
print.
it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but honestly, it wasn't as exciting to me to feel the book as it was to just read it as it comes, because I read it on a ebook platform. I
Mhm.
just read it. I was on a plane. I had finished the book,
Yeah.
and so then I have the ebook, and so then I'm reading it as a novel, not as it's done. Right?
Yeah.
There can be edits, with second drafts, or like to republish it as a different edition, but really you're done.
Yeah.
And so to read it knowing that you really can't stop, because every time you read your book, I'm at my computer
Yes,
and then I'm like, oh, I'm going to change that line. Oh, I'm going to change this. So you're not reading, you're continually editing, and at some
right.
point in time, you have to say, I'm done. And I just needed to do that because I could still rewrite it now if I wanted to.
Of course.
But
Yes.
being on the plane and just reading my book as a story, and there was a space between at least a couple months from the
Right.
last time I wrote it to when I was ready, and that was fun. I enjoyed that. I felt like, I'm like, wow, this is a book. This actually worked.
It is a book. So, talking about changes, let's talk about your cover. So, this is the cover on the copy that I have. And of course, I
Mhm.
ordered it as soon as it was out. So, it's the original copy. Now, I'm going to share my screen if I can find my cursor. There we are. And I want to show what the cover is now. So, this is the cover up on Amazon. Let me just move it over so it's in the
Right.
middle.
And I'm just going to close my window because they're starting to do construction. Want to make sure. Sorry, that's the thing with buying an
That's
old
okay.
house in Switzerland that we're renovating.
I'll cut that part out. It's
Okay,
gone.
great.
Yeah, so I wanted to just show what the cover looks like today. Same title, very different cover, right?
Very
So I'll
different.
just give people a minute just to look at it. Different color of font and type, different placement, different photo. So now we'll just go back to this one for a second so people can remember what it was. Now let's
Mhm.
talk about why the change in the cover.
Well, do you want to bring back up the cover? Because I can talk about it too.
Sure.
Well, actually, before you do that, I'll tell you why.
Okay.
The why is that um, that was a licensed photo that I felt I was worried about using a photo I found on the internet that wasn't going to be licensed appropriately for book sales. I didn't want to infringe upon any laws. So I made sure I did it appropriately. I bought the photo, I got the license, I kept the license to make sure in case there was any conflict. And the last thing I thought about that there would be other issues besides licensing issues for the cover. But when I noted that I had a Facebook page when I first published the book that I
Mhm.
never paid attention to again. There's like 2 or 3 posts on that. And I all of a sudden when I was visiting my Facebook, which I'm not a big Facebook user, I saw many, 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 many likes. And when I looked at the demographics of the likes, they were all 40 to 60-year-old men. Actually, all of them coming from India, and it was hundreds per day. And I
Mm.
realized then that I used the cover of a 13-year-old girl, and now it was being
Yes.
somehow connected with a demographic that is not typically interested in coming of age fiction, and that worried me.
Yes.
I realized this is probably somebody, a relative, or maybe her friend, whoever took a picture of this photo. I thought it was wonderful when I first saw it because her eyes are vacant and
Right.
worried. And when I first saw that photo, I said, "This is Ryder." I
Right.
even thought that it looked like Ryder, but that there might have been some uh, misuse of her
Mm.
photo. And this young girl who knows how old she is now, she doesn't need that conflict in her life.
Right.
So I
Right.
discontinued
Super.
that,
Yeah.
but happily, I hired a designer for the next one,
Yeah.
and that's where, if you share the screen there, Ryder, not giving any plots away, is it's the setting is in New York City. She arrives by bus. There's a lot of bus themes in the novel.
Huh?
She plays the violin, and that's pretty obvious from the start.
You
And
see her
it's
here, right there.
yeah, and that's here. And so the original of this photo had a whole bunch of people on this photo that were photoshopped out. And then we just put Ryder back in that limelight there
Nice.
because that really is her passion. And
Yes.
it just highlights it, but she's being swallowed by this bigger city. There's so much larger issues that are going to squash her and her dreams, that I thought the complexity and the darkness, the fact that this is essentially a black and white photo with a
Mhm.
little bit of color coming through, and the steam in the background, giving you a little sinister look, and then the Ryder Stephens looking like it's part of the Star Wars theme coming in. I like
Yes.
that.
Yeah. It's
Um,
also, yeah, it's her, and her whole life is about change right now as the
mhm.
story starts. So I love it that that's indicating there's motion happening here and there's change coming for her.
Yeah, and the fact that we did get, in the very first, when we were creating this design, the people were still there. And then we took less people out. We, scrub a
Yeah.
person out, scrub a person out. And
Oh.
then it just seemed like we should make her alone because she got to New York out by herself
Hmm.
and she was alone.
Yeah.
And there are scenes where she's walking down the street alone. So
Yeah.
clearly she meets people, but I just thought this gave more of the essence of
Right. Right.
her journey.
Yeah.
I'm happy with it.
Fantastic. Yeah.
I'm really happy with the book,
It's
at the
really
cover.
good. It's lovely. Well, I have one of the originals, so
You had one of the original.
I too. Mine. It's on my bookshelf. So tell me, what was the hardest part of writing this story?
Well, it's a difficult question because I really enjoyed it.
It.
The hardest part is selling it, to be honest, but I'm sure you've heard that before.
Yes.
Marketing
Yes.
is the
Yes.
hardest. That's
Yeah.
where it kind of came like this all of a sudden is not fun anymore. Um, but the best part was editing it. I wrote this book
Yeah.
in 3 months, and then I uh, wrote another one, which Ryder is in. There's a sequel to this. But then I sent the two to this editor, and I said, "Which one should we work on first?" Not the other one I still haven't gotten to yet, but he liked this one,
Okay.
and so I I we it took 4 years to edit it. Uh, More, that's why I keep wanting to change. That's why I had to finally just agree to stop. Okay, it's done.
Yep.
Just publish it. Because I could still be editing if I wanted to now. I would say the hardest part was the fact that I am a physician, not a writer. And when I first started writing, I was really worried that somebody would judge me for my writing style, for the sentence structure,
Okay.
that I didn't diversify my sentences enough, and that it was too choppy. And I would read like New York Times articles and literally write down on a list how people started sentences because I wanted to make sure my sentences were diverse. Because I read a ton, but and I write, but not like this.
Novel.
And
Yeah.
so when I think my problem with my first couple drafts is I wasn't paying attention to the story. I was paying attention to whether people were going to make fun of my writing. And so and then the first draft clearly reflects that because the ending is completely different on the first draft, the one that you didn't read. Because I was so worried about the writings, the structures of the sentences. But
Yeah.
once I got into that mode, which took about a year and a half of writing and
Yeah.
getting used to the fact,
Sure.
okay, I can write a sentence, I can write diversity. I don't have to make a list of how to begin
Right. Yeah.
sentences.
Yeah. It's good though.
I got this now. Then I started paying attention to the characters and really putting myself in Ryder's shoes and how she because it's written in first
Yep.
person, like how she sees her and then how people are reacting to her and making it realistic.
Mhm.
And then it became much more fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's very interesting. And I'll bet there's a lot of writers who have that fear,
Mhm.
right? And we try and encourage people to get the story first and then
Yeah.
go back and work on all the craft part that comes around it on how to structure a sentence and how to have variety in sentences and how to do an entry hook and because without a story none of that makes any difference anyway. You need a story.
Yeah, I needed you to talk to
Yep.
me before. Yeah, but again, because it came from me just getting out of my homework assignment.
Well, and
That's
also
how the book
it probably comes a little bit from your school background, and I'm sure there's a little
Yes.
bit of perfectionism in there that in the medical profession you have to do stuff right. You don't get to go,
Hmm.
oops, flub that, sorry, right? It's a very different thing.
It's 100% the reason we're always being judged, and
Right,
so
of course
I
you are.
was feared of being judged about my sentence structure. I'm over that now,
And
but
yeah, and so
yeah.
and the joy of writing the story is writing the story. And I worry sometimes that writers get stuck on they can't write a sentence and then they stop writing instead of sticking with the joy of writing a story and
Mhm.
then worry about the other stuff that has to come with it. Because once you have a story, you're hooked, you're passionate, and it's much more fun to work on your sentence structures and your paragraph structures and your scenes and all of that when you actually
Mm,
have your story and you're motivated. But I mean, that's my personal
yeah.
view. How I don't know.
No, I think you're right. I'm reading a Stephen King novel now. I think it's his latest one called Later. That's the name of the book.
Right.
And in the one of the characters is, well, the main character is a literary agent,
Oh,
and she and her I'm not giving anything away for this book, but her main uh her meal ticket and dies.
right.
And she needs to know the plot of his last story so she can write it for him and just pretend that this writer wrote it so she can, you know, carry on and get some money out of it. But anyhow, the author, he tells her that he has everything in his mind from the beginning. Like it's all there from the
Mhm.
beginning to the end. Of course, this is Stephen King's mind that you're reading through this character, right?
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
there's a little bit of him in how he's telling this story, but he says have everything in place, the whole thing. You can change things obviously, but
Yep.
then start writing. But you know, speaking of Stephen King, when I did start writing a book, when I realized that this was no longer a novella and it was a book, I literally typed in howtowriteabook.com and up came Stephen King's top 10 things for how to write a book.
Yeah,
And he, you know, I said, well, he's successful.
he's pretty
I'm going
good.
to do what Stephen King says. And, you know, he says you have to read every single day. You have to write every single day. You have to set a limit for how you do it. Yeah. And so I followed his script, and it was fun that way. Like
Yeah.
even if I wasn't into writing, I set my limit for 600 words a day. And I rarely went over that. I really did 600 words a day. And then if I was at 600 words, I just stopped.
If
And
you,
if I was at 300 words and I didn't want to continue, I pushed myself because that was what Stephen told me to do.
yeah,
And I realized that sometimes those 300 words, when I was pushing myself to reach Steve's limit, um, were my best because I wasn't so into it. You know,
right.
I was actually more creative because I was like, I
Yeah.
just got to get this over with. And there's one scene where they're arguing at the Christmas dinner table that I really did not want to be writing that day. And there's an edge to that scene
Yeah.
because I was edgy because I didn't
Yeah,
want to
yeah.
write, but Stephen King told me how to write. So
So
that's what
perfect.
Stephen King told me to do.
You know, and I wonder too, like, did you feel like the next day when you start, do you feel good that you did that extra 300 words the day before? So now you're starting in the right spot?
Yeah, I always went back. So you know, the 600 words were written on Monday. And then when I started on Tuesday, I went back and read the 600 words. And sometimes I did tweak that
Right.
before I started the next 600.
Right.
Um, but yeah, that's when I realized that it seemed that my plots took, when I pushed myself, the plots, they all, it's not all set in my mind, even though I had
Right.
goals after I
Right.
learned how to write a story. But they were just a little bit more juicy, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, super. All right. Now, if you can remember far enough back, what's the
Mhm.
most significant change you made when you were using Storyteller?
Oh, well, the notes I really liked. So you know, I jumped into Storyteller after you were my third editor. You did my content
Yeah.
editing. So at that point in time, we uploaded it to Storyteller, and you were looking, like, we weren't looking for line by line edits because that had been done by two previous editors, but more the content. So
Hmm.
you would, I just love the fact that it was compartmentalized as opposed to one long word draft, which I had with my editors. I had chapter one. And then I just went to reread the first upload to
Yeah.
Fictionary for
Yeah.
chapter one, which is now, I guess, chapter three. But you pulled it up, and then right next to it, this notes. And then you clearly wrote that it was fast paced. It was the whole section. You summarized that chapter, and having the notes compared to the chapter so I can compartmentalize it, because that was also another problem I had, is I wasn't writing with chapters in mind. I had to go back and transition, like, you know, you end one chapter and you start another. I was just writing. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't like at the 14th draft, because it ended up being 21, but I consider each draft with small changes. I
Yeah.
had to go back and start making breaks, and then
Hmm.
ending and beginning.
Yep.
And if I had done Fictionary in the beginning, it would have been in the mindset
Yep.
to have those breaks instead of having to rewrite the breaks in. So
Yeah.
I love that.
That's interesting. You know, there's very little out there on how to structure chapters and scenes and when you do it and why you
Mhm.
do it, right? And I really do hope that Fictionary helps people figure that out and at least makes them think about it that I can't just have a blob of writing and I can't have 17 scenes in one chapter because it's just too
Mhm.
long and stuff. And so I
And
often
characters, and the number of characters
right.
per, that was interesting. I'm like, one, I think one chapter might have had 17 characters. You're like, well, that's way too many. You
Yep.
know,
Yep.
who are these characters? I had to go back to see who these characters were,
I know.
and then I started cutting people out because
Yeah.
it
And I
was it
always
was too confusing.
as an editor, I try and say, like, I'm the person who's reading every single word and paying attention to your characters. And if I can't remember who somebody is, the reader's never remembering who this is, right? Like
No.
I'm actually
Mm-mm.
looking to go, okay. And you know, the advantage for me in fiction is I go and look at the character list and then I go look at the characters for scene and think I can't even find this character somewhere else. Well, why is this character here? Right. And
Yeah.
it's a thing that, you know, when writers are working with an editor, it's a thing that an editor should be pointing out because they are concentrating on every character and asking themselves, why
Mhm.
is this character in this book? Where readers not, but they might go, oh, someone died and I don't know who it was. And
Exactly.
I'm using that a
There,
different book, but I remember reading that in a published book thinking, wait, which brother died? Hang on. And you know, I had to flip back.
yeah.
Their names were so similar. You think, I don't know who just died. That's a big thing in
Oh,
this
okay.
book.
Let's go back to the similar books, because when you bring up the characters, my first well, the edition or the draft before I sent it to you, I had Jack as a character, Rick as a character,
Yeah,
and when you put them they're all ending CK, and they're very similar. And then I had
yeah.
Sarah and
I remember that.
what was her, Sarah and Susan, I think. Anyhow, they were too similar. I
Awesome.
changed it to Evelyn. So the Susan is now Evelyn, and the the Rick is now Garen, which is
Right.
my husband's middle name.
Oh, nice.
Because they were two similar names. The S's were going to get confused, and and then of course the
Mhm.
four-letter words that were the only changes
And
were the
the
first
same.
two letters. And you do see that when you look at Storyteller and you look at the list of characters, it makes it stands out.
Yeah.
And that's what's nice. It's a Storyteller is a different dimension, because like I said, you read the same thing over and over again as an author,
Yeah.
you lose perspective. And it's Storyteller is almost like bringing in an editor who tells you something different. Is the Storyteller is making you see it in a different way.
Mhm.
Almost like when I was reading it on a plane, reading it for the
Right.
first time, is that you're thinking, okay, this is how somebody's going to read this book. And then you can,
Yeah.
dissect it
Yeah.
mathematically, which is what Storyteller does,
Yeah.
really.
You know,
It's
and
nice.
character names is an easy way to fix stuff and make it an easier read for writer or for the readers to remember who characters
Hmm.
are. It's an easy fix to go, those two. And often writers don't think about the ending, like one syllable and the ending is the same. The mind just picks it up as CK and that's it. And then,
Yeah. And it was Laura. So it was Sarah and Laura.
right,
Those were
because
the
they
two
sound the
names.
same. Yeah.
Yes. And they were too
Yep. And
similar.
you think,
Yeah.
I'm getting confused on which one this is. And then so I always
Hmm.
point it out because, you know, really as an editor, I should be looking at that. But so tell me, so after you finished, you exported, what was your next, so you're ready to go. What was your next step in the publication process?
Well, I self-published.
Yep.
So I did it in April 2020. So my idea was that people are stuck at home.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was so I was looking for, an agent, and I did have a few offers, but I wasn't comfortable with it. They seemed more vanity, and I didn't want to go that route. Um, and I had people to tell me just to keep pushing to try to find an agent. But then when COVID happened, I thought, I'd just get this out there. And
Yep.
plus I needed to stop editing it, because like I said, I could have gone on forever.
Sure.
And that process is a learning process.
Mhm.
How to work Amazon, what to do, how to put it on other, should I do an audiobook? Should I not do an audiobook? There is an audiobook for Ryder. I don't know
Oh,
if you
okay,
saw that.
terrific. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll put links up for that.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
And actually it's interesting because I had so many requests for audiobooks, and it's expensive, as you may know, to do an
Yes.
audiobook. So I thought, is it worth it? But I put an ad out in Upworks for an audiobook, and I found this young girl. She was 18 or 19. So she had a voice that could be consistent with a 13-year-old
Sure.
narrator. And she came from a family of actors in LA. So I hired the whole family. So her dad does Jack, which is, the Jack, the father figure.
Yeah.
And her brother, her 13-year-old brother, does Thomas, the young kid. So it's a whole family that works together. Now,
Yeah.
the mother didn't want to get involved, which kind of broke my heart because I really wanted her to play
Yep.
the Sarah.
Mm.
But she does a good job of it. And they're a musical family too, so they were very engaged with the theme of, because
Right.
there's a lot of music in this.
Yeah.
So that was fun, a learning experience. So there's things I would have done a little bit differently with the audiobook. Had a it's all first experience. So all of that publication process is first experience. That should I do this again, I would do things differently. um there's a I forget which well, you know him. You did a podcast for him. That I forgot
Oh, I've
his
done so
name.
many.
I know, but
I
I
need a
actually saw
hint.
your name pop up on his he wrote a book that says how to publish. And it's all about being self-published, and
Right.
that was exceptionally helpful. I wish I could tell you what it was, but I can't
That's
remember.
okay. Doesn't matter.
Yeah,
There's so many of them. I don't know. I don't
yeah, yeah,
know.
yeah.
Nice.
So
Oh,
yeah.
so next up then, what are you doing for writing?
Well, I still have the second book that I
Okay.
wrote. Remember, I wrote this writer for three
Yeah.
months. 3 months later, I wrote the next one, and then gave up on that one. And
Yeah.
that one's, I now that I understand how to write a story better, and now that I have
Mhm.
Storyteller to help me, because I think I definitely will write it within the framework of that.
Nice.
So it cuts out a lot of steps that I had to do in the end. But there's an island off the coast of Australia called Nauru, Nauru,
Okay.
and it is now being housed for asylum seekers trying to get into Australia. I got involved in it because they needed a doctor there, and
Right.
so they this one NGO had recruited me to work as a doctor on the island.
Oh, good for you.
But it has a fascinating history about, this was the one of the three most wealthiest countries in the world, was this small island, because they did phosphate mining. Anyhow, long story, phenomenally interesting how they became bankrupt, and how they essentially started selling themselves to
Right.
Australia to recruit asylums, and that's how they're making money now. It's just fascinating. And I thought, well, I want Ryder to be in this, but how do I get Ryder to Nauru?
Yeah.
And so I came up with this 40-something-year-old American expat who was living in Australia, who's a journalist, and she was writing on Nauru Island and about the asylum seekers, but then going back to the history of Nauru, which it's we don't have the scope of time here to discuss it, but it's so interesting.
Yeah.
But then how do I get her back to New York? So I made something horrible happen to this journalist in Australia, so it gets her back to her main country, which is New
Right.
York, and then she meets Ryder there.
Yeah.
The story does not work now. There's way too much liberties take, but there's
Yeah.
somehow that I'm going to connect these two storylines and bring Ryder back into it. So keep Ryder alive. And I
Sure.
had to decide whether or not Ryder is going to be, how old she's going to be during this
Right.
interaction.
Yeah.
Maybe she will jump a decade
Oh,
and then be able
sure.
to reflect back. But that's all here and in
Yes.
Storyteller.
You got to write it down.
Yeah.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, that sounds good. So what we're going to do, well, obviously we're going to post this on YouTube, and there I will put links to the buy. So when people buy your book, but not this cover, the other cover,
Mhm.
please leave a review, because reviews are very important to writers. And as writers, it's great if we all support each other. I'm also going to check out your audiobook, and I'll put a link to that too. Lots of people love those, and when you're in the car on a long drive, it's a great thing to be doing.
Mhm.
So I'll put that up as well. And it's been super enjoyable talking to you. Really
Yeah.
fun, very informative. And is there any words you'd like to leave as a final word to writers, of one little piece of advice, perhaps? Or
I guess what many people will say, just enjoy the process, right? I didn't know what I was doing, but I had so much fun trying to figure it out. and I am so excited to start the next step. But in Stephen King's advice, I do say just write every single day. Just
Nice.
never stop, because
Yep.
once you stop, then you. I think whenever I read a book and the ending doesn't make sense, I'm like, these they went on summer holiday and came back and wrote it later.
And
Like
then
there's
finished
a
it
gap
later.
here.
Yep.
If they just continued writing, there was no way there would be this like disconnect between the beginning and the end.
Yeah.
So, and that's just fun because you become like, this family was like, they were real. They are real people, when I'm writing. And that is so much fun to have this
Mm.
little, your own personal little world that you can go hide away in for a
Yeah,
while,
yeah, sure,
Yeah.
sure. Fantastic. Well, thank you for today. And